All right, we'll get started. Hello, everybody. I'm David Litton. I work for Advictorium Solutions. We're based out of Atlanta, but I live in Birmingham, but was from here. Got my website on there, or blog, salesforcesidekick.com, so please check that out, subscribe. Got a lot of flow-based kind of introduction to becoming a developer kind of post on there, so hopefully that might give you a few ideas of how you can use Process Builder or Flow or Quick Actions or something to take your skills to the next level. Big thank you to all of our sponsors, the ones on this especially, but all the other ones as well. And let's talk about this. So I've got 30 slides. We've got 20 minutes. I guess we got a late start, so even less. But we're going to go over Workbench, and we're going to go over Force.com IDE. So Force.com IDE and Workbench are two tools that took me as an admin a little while to kind of get into. But once I finally got into those two tools, kind of opened my eyes to everything else that I could do, and kind of gets you, if you have a little bit of developer tendencies, a little bit more comfortable with the tools that developers actually use. So benefits of Workbench. Why do I love Workbench? It's web-based, it's free, easy, it's powerful. So when I log into an org, I've got a little favorite button that I hit, takes me to Workbench, and I quickly just log in there, and now I can do all my data work. Or do any of the other tools that we'll talk about. So that's why I like Workbench. There's a few other ones on here that are really good. Data Loader just got improved a little bit, so that's a great one now too. The Man Tools, if you're able to afford it, is a really great tool. Not everyone can afford that license cost. And that's why it's in green, because it's not free. All the other ones are free. So keep that in mind. But with Workbench, what can we do? So if you do any sort of data work, you can do all of your inserts, updates, deletes really easily with Workbench. So I do that for anything that's kind of smaller in numbers. Once I get into hundreds of thousands, I typically go into Data Loader just because the error handling's a little better. But anything that you're just doing really quick, Workbench is great for that. Some of the tips and tricks there is disable feed tracking. So if you are changing account names or something and you don't want people to know you're changing account names, you can hit that button and nobody will know. So that's good if you have accidentally done something wrong with the first data load. So keep that in mind. There's tons of other ones there. I'm not going to go through everyone. Some of them, like the insert null fields, that's if I'm doing a load where I have blank values mixed within actual values, am I deleting a value if it's there, or am I just ignoring it? That's what that one does. And then the really cool one, this one was actually one that I found out about recently, password management. So with password management, it's under the utilities, it's kind of hidden. You're actually able to put in a user ID and then put in an actual password for them. So if you have a sales rep that we were talking earlier doesn't have email, or for some reason they just can't get that link to work right, you can actually pick a password for them and tell them, hey, test 1, 2, 3, 4. Type that in and it'll work. So pretty cool, nice little feature if you're an admin for a company dealing with users. But my favorite one is a SQL query. So within Workbench, we were actually able to run a query. So just like if you're doing a select statement within an Apex trigger or class, we can do kind of a quick version of that. This can actually help you build your select statement or your query statement within the Apex. But we're able to pick any object. So in this case, I've got attachments, so I could run this on attachments to see every attachment in my org. I can put the filters on there. So if I'm building Apex class or trigger, it really helps me, since I'm an admin, I'm not very good at writing code yet. It really helps me make sure that I'm putting those kind of additional filters with, maybe a fuzzy matching or something with the contains, and making sure I'm putting the right syntax in there. So really powerful in that sense. It also gives you all the different objects that we don't see in the UI. You might be, if you use like data loader or demand tools, you've probably seen some of these before. But the great thing about this is we can do record counts. So really quick and easy, if I'm in a brand new org and they're like, hey, we need to do something with our reports, how many reports do they have? I can quickly put run this, just throw the record count in there, and I can see, do we have 800? Do we have 8,000? How big of an issue is this going to be? If it's 20, maybe I can go make the edits for them. But if it's 800, is that a change request? Is that a year-long project, or what are we going to do? So it lets you see the size of the impact that kind of hidden object has, whether it's permission sets, whether it's public groups, any kind of hidden object that you're not necessarily seeing with the standard Salesforce report. How big of an impact is it having? So the cool thing is we get a preview of all the records, so you can pull in all the different fields. Just like if you're going to do an export with like data loader, we can also do an export here. So I can run that. I can see I've got 800 reports. Let me pull in like the IDs of the person who last run it, or the ID of the person who created it, when it was last run, all that kind of information. I find out that out of that 800, I've only got 200 that have been run in the past 2 years. So am I able to now purge out that old data? So with the queries, you're really able to kind of analyze that data a whole lot quicker and easier. And if you're a consultant working with a lot of different orgs, it's a really easy way for you to get in there because you don't have to deal with security tokens. So now to the fun stuff, a little bit more into the developer world, Force.com IDE. So we've got 4 up here, Developer Console. That's the one in the browser. I'm sure everyone's probably seen that. Then we've got Eclipse, or the Force.com IDE. And then Maven's Mate, which is an add-on to Sublime, which, just like Cloud9, is a non-free program, unless you hit ignore on every time at the pop-up after about 15 saves tells you to purchase. So you don't have to buy it, but technically not free. So those are the kind of the 4 main ones. And Force.com IDE is probably the most popular. It's the closely tied to Salesforce, and there's a lot more documentation on getting it in and set up. So benefits of an IDE. So what can you do? You can do development work in there, so Apex, Visual Force, and your metadata. So metadata is like the back end of what your Salesforce actually is. So like your objects, that's all XML, which we'll dive into in a little bit. But that's kind of like what makes up Salesforce. And then you can deploy to anywhere, which we'll talk about in a little bit more detail. And no orgs required, which kind of goes along with that. So I could pick up a random developer org and pull that into a project in Force.com IDE and make some changes there. And that project or that org is kind of saved in that state. So I don't actually have to have that org's connection anymore. It can go away because I've got all the metadata that is now in the project. So that's all that I needed. So what is a project? It's got kind of a little tree. So the metadata components and the metadata, that's like where you're going to live. So the metadata components are the different like kind of groupings, and then inside that we have like the details. So like objects would be your metadata components, and in there you'd have like account, contact, and you could dive in and see what's actually going on there. So when you create a new project, you get to pick what you're actually going to be bringing in. So default, it's going to show you where, I just want Apex triggers, classes, Visual Force. So as an admin, I'm probably going to want to change that and do the custom way. Which first we got to log in. And yeah, so then we want to go to the custom. So we'll hit this second button down here. And this will allow us now to select everything in our org for the most part. So, we're able to pull in all these small little item or objects that we saw in Workbench. We can now pull out that into our project here. We wait for a moment, sometimes, hopefully not as long as last night's demos. And then that is now in our IDE. So that's, just my Salesforce org in the metadata format, which now I can drill into more And on this object, I've got everything that makes up that object right there in XML. So XML is a little confusing at first, but it's actually really easy. Like if you've done any sort of HTML, it's similar enough to where you can get the hang of it. So all you have to do is understand the tags. That's really all it is to it. You got a start tag, you got an end tag. So here we've got action overrides, and then if you see the little slash at the bottom one, that's how we know that that tag is closed. So when we're getting into a situation where maybe we want to copy and paste something from one object to another, you just got to make sure you grab the right tags, grab the whole part, because if I just copied the first red and blue section and pasted that in, I'm getting an error because I didn't actually close that whole piece of code. So you want to avoid that. I've done that a few times trying to copy and paste fields, and you're like, why is this not working? You just got to take a step back and make sure you got the whole line of code that you're trying to work with. So what else can you do? The really cool part about this is I can deploy, I can refresh from anywhere. So if I'm making a few changes in the configuration in the UI and I need to make sure that now that is here, all I do is hit refresh from server and it does it for me. So I don't have to really think about it. I just make sure that I pull everything from server, instantly back down, updates all my metadata there. So if I made any changes, that's going to be overridden. But that way, if you're running tests or building anything, you can make sure that you're working with the most recent content. But you can also do this, and I think I've got it selected there. Yeah, so if you see, I've only got one of those folders. So that's just one metadata component that I'm refreshing from the server. So I don't have to, I can go up to like the top level project and refresh the whole project, but I can refresh just one object to make it a little quicker. So if I just made a change to the contact object, I can go refresh from server just the contact object. So that'll make it quicker. If I was working on a trigger or on the account or something, I'm not gonna have to worry about that being refreshed and overwritten. But if I accidentally hit refresh from the project level, then I lost all my work. So version control is also good, but that's not a part of this presentation. And going back to the XML here, so this is an example of using the fields. So with this, I can copy all those fields there, paste that onto another object, and then go back and hit that deploy to server, and then I can deploy that change to the object, and I don't have to go through and make all those custom fields. So had to find out the hard way about that one when a client wanted to switch something from a custom object to being on the account. I was too lazy to make 50 custom fields again, and how else are you going to do it but copy and paste? So it saves a lot of time, took a few minutes, and all you got to do then is just make sure you get the profile set up. So this actually doesn't do anything with the profiles, so I had to go in and just make a few checkboxes with the select all. So not bad, but keep that in mind that, you know, just like if you're doing a change set, this does not have anything to do with the profiles. Profiles are separate. Speaking of change sets, who likes them? You can use this to deploy. So what I was doing there is I can deploy one little piece of this as well. So just like, you know, I could refresh from the project level or refresh from metadata component, I can deploy, like if I had one flow I wanted to deploy, I could, in the flow definition piece of this, I could deploy just that one flow that I made a change to, which flow doesn't really work well with IDEs, but so that might be a bad example, but you can do that. So you don't have to deploy a whole object or a whole like component. You can deploy the little piece of metadata there. So deploy anywhere. This is the fun part. So if you have a dev org, you can deploy it to your company's production org, technically. You might destroy a few things, but it's possible. So it's really handy from a consultant perspective. If you had a few things that you wanted to kind of make your own project that you used for all new implementations, where you put in like some custom reports and maybe a few field changes, you could build that out once in a dev org, and then every time you get a new client, post that to the client's org, and then you have all those customizations already in there, so you don't have to do it every time. And then my favorite, search everything. So in here, who's ever had like an employee leave that was an admin and everything starts breaking. Anybody? A few people? Yeah, so this is your new best friend for that. With your metadata, you have the whole org in like a searchable format now, to where I can type in, set my parameters, is it case sensitive or not, all of that, and then I can choose the objects that I want to search through, or I can search everything. And then with that, I did two different searches. One I did off of myself on the left there, and then one I did the rating example there. So we can see all the layouts there, all the objects and profiles that have the rating object in it, and then we can see everything that my user was associated to on the left. So that way I can quickly...
Question, are you searching the object or something that's like a field in the object, or like something else that's sorry?
Searching all the metadata. So like it's searching all that XML to see where that value, in this case rating, shows up in the XML. So we can select, like if we wanted to only search an object, or like there we could only search dashboard names or something. Like we could pick which part of the metadata we want to dive into, but by default you can have it search everything. So on that way we can see, what is that, assignment rules or something like that. So you can see what that user is associated to, which can save you a headache instead of having to click through everything. So that one's fun. Can really save you a lot of time when you get onto like those reports where they're run by somebody and all that kind of craziness that can be really hard to track down. So thank you. Appreciate it. Any questions? Yes.
When you're adding new fields to the IDE, is it added to the page layout in the same way when you create custom fields and when you add it and that?
You'll have to update the page layout as well. There is a page layout piece there, like that's all like in the metadata too. So page layouts are in the metadata, but it's going to be probably easier for you to make that change in the UI.
I've tried to get Eclipse working with this a few times. How old of a version do you have to go to, do you know, to actually make Eclipse work with this IDE?
Did you try from the Salesforce instructions of how to get it? Because on the
I've tried the newest version of Eclipse, that didn't work. It couldn't connect to Salesforce. I tried to go back a few versions back, and it still wouldn't connect to Salesforce.
there was an issue like a few months ago because the new version of Eclipse was on like Spring, but so you had to like go back a version to get it to where when you got on like API 35 instead of 36, I think it was. So there was an issue recently with that, but I know it can be a little kind of weird to set up the first time, and it confused me. Like, I think I gave up the first like 2 times I tried to install it because it's like, paste this code where? Like, it's not very clear. But if you've got access to Pluralsight, David Liu can, like, he has a great like 4-minute video of how to get Sublime with MavenMate set up, which is really awesome too. Same, everything is this, just a little prettier. Lots more colors that makes it easier to read. But yeah, it's
like 99% easier to set up than it's made.
yeah, it's just there's not as much out there on that. So
So with change sets in Sales code, you can run specific tests when you're deploying Apex. Do you know anything they're going to do Force.com ID to run specific tests and not all the tests?
I've not tried that. I'm not sure. Would you know that?
Yeah, so, yeah, I think with Mavens you have that ability,
Okay.
the new Mavens app.
Okay.
But I myself not tried with Force.com IDE.
Okay.
But I think with Mavens we have that ability where you can run a specific test.
Okay. Because that's a new feature that I think couple of.
Yeah, 26th version has a new feature where, let's say you have like 4 classes that you are deploying, right? And what Salesforce does is, let's say you have 100 test classes,
Right.
Salesforce runs all the 100 test classes, right?
Yeah.
But that's actually good running all the 100 test classes because
Time-consuming.
but it's time consuming, and if you want something to get done very quickly, you can just take the test classes for only those 4 classes that you run it. In change sets, you have that option now. You see run as specified test.
All right. Thanks, everybody.